Welcome back to movementprofessional.com. So I'm here with fellow physical therapist Mike Piscaya. We're going to be going over a concept of a closed chain mobility. So we're familiar, most trainers are familiar with open chain movements versus closed chain movements for strength training or conditioning, where an open chain movement would be where you move the distal extremity, the hand, the foot, and you basically have a fixed pelvis. A closed chain would be you fix the distal extremity, the hand, the foot, and then you move the trunk or the center around it. So with mobility, we're going to fix the position, the distal position of the hand. In this case, we're going to go over the shoulder using a kettlebell on the ground, and I'm going to try to do a series on this to show different ways that we can manipulate the same concept. But we're going to fix the shoulder position that we're looking for, which would be optimal. We're not really trying to go for excessive, but just optimal in line with the flat surface. All right, and then we're going to move the body around it, and what that does is allows for a lot more feedback of what muscles that you need to use in order to kind of connect the overhead position or whatever shoulder position you're looking for with the rest of the body. All right, and then we also get some idea of how one arm and movements of one arm affect movements of the other arm, and then we can kind of do an assessment for asymmetry as well. So we got Mike first in a position where he's just kind of like racked out, all right, with both hands on the waist. So you can think of this as if we're holding a bar overhead with our knuckles together. That's what we're trying to emulate at this point. And it's a good assessment to see if, one, you can get there and how much you're struggling, but what does the rest of your body do when you're in this overhead position? So if you have a lot of tightness in your overhead position, you may get there and the kettlebell might keep your hands there, but there's going to be some type of compensation down the chain. So Mike looks pretty good with it. Let me have you move towards your feet a little bit more so you can just kind of wiggle down so you feel just more stretched out. Is that tight there for you? Mm-hmm. All right. So you can just get a sense, you can ask your clients, like, where does it feel different? Does it feel symmetrical? Does it feel tighter on one side than the other?
No.
Pretty same.
Yeah.
All right, so in this case, we're going to have to dive deeper to find any asymmetries. Now what I want you to do is bend your knees. All right, still kind of keep a sense that you're really moving away. And then I want you to just do a posterior tilt. Tilt your pelvis. Think about bringing your rib cage down. Does that change the stretch?
Yeah.
All right, so you get a change of stretch there. Does it feel the same on both sides?
Left a little more.
So now you get a little bit more of a sense already just by moving the pelvis that there's a difference side to side. All right, we haven't even gone to one side at a time yet. Now arch your back, okay, and then just go back and forth for that 10 times. All right, and just get a sense of seeing if that loosens up the more you do. But every time I want you to exhale as you posterior tilt and see if you can drop the ribs. And move for there. So if you're a manual therapist and you're doing some manual work with somebody, you can also just hold down the ribs here. Does that feel like more of a stretch? Mm-hmm. All right, so now go ahead into your anterior tilt. Okay, I'm going to hold that there, and then go into your posterior tilt. Breathe out. And you feel more of a stretch through there. Yeah. All right, so just by putting your hand on the rib cage, you can guide one side versus the other. All right, let me try this side. Does it feel different one side versus the other? Still getting the stretch there, right? Okay, but you get a sense of if I want to kind of isolate maybe more into this side, the front chest there, and also just teach the relationship between the pelvic position and the rib cage position. He'll get much more feedback about that and how that affects his overhead position. All right, so now let's go legs straight, so full supine, which would emulate more of a standing position. And reach your heels, so like you're in dorsiflex position here, toes up, like reach your heels away, and then again go through that pelvic tilt. And what you should notice is that it's a little bit more difficult to get your pelvic tilt because your quads are going to be kind of pulling down a little bit more, pulling you into more of an anterior tilt. But at the same time, you get even more feedback. You still feel the stretch there? Okay? And then I can guide one side. So let's just go through like 5 pelvic tilts. All right, and then really arch, go the opposite way to feel the contrast. And then come down, breathe all the air out. All right, a few more. And then you should feel that maybe you can get a little bit deeper, or you feel like something's loosening up the chain with each pelvic tilt. All right, so it's teaching this kind of pelvic control and how that connects to up top. All right, so now let's go one side at a time, just left hand overhead. Okay, so when you're gripping the kettlebell, it's also a time to just work on different grip positions. So we want to stabilize this as much as we can. So I don't want the fingers being the only thing that are holding the bell because there'll be more movement in the fingers and the wrist. So we want to really stabilize the wrist by almost promoting more of a flexion through the wrists here. So that will walk the arm down as we move around it. All right, so from here, let's do the same movements. Let's try pelvic tilt, see how that affects the shoulder there. And now we have a free right arm, okay? So I want you to bring this right arm up, and I want you to protract it, and then drop down, breathe all the air out, and see if that increases the tension a little bit more. All right, now try to reach across your body, breathe out again. Does that increase it even more, right? Okay, so we can play around with different protraction angles and see how that affects the overhead position here. Now if we bring this elbow down, let's go into a horizontal abduction, internal rotation, same idea, breathe out, tuck, create a little bit of internal rotation down, and see how that affects the shoulder there as well. Okay, so now you can actually be affecting the right shoulder and the left and the right at the same time, and you're focusing on some asymmetries that might be happening in the pelvis, or a better way to state it is you actually be training one side of the pelvis at a time. So if you have any asymmetries, it makes it a little easier to train them. All right, so then we would just switch to the other side. We would compare sides, so it becomes an assessment. And if you already know that somebody's got a restricted side, then you can just spend more time on one. What I was explaining to Mike before, go ahead and stand up for me, Mike, is a common assessment of shoulder mobility. And the FMS does this, is they look at, so let's go and look at your one hand overhead, one hand behind the back. Okay. So if we look at this pattern of movement, we have flexion, abduction, external rotation up here, internal rotation, extension, and adduction down here. And we also have to be able to extend the thoracic spine. So it's a pattern through here. So if we look at it and say that Mike has a more restricted, let me see the other side. I believe we found that he had a more restricted pattern here, or it felt a little stiffer for him. So this is internal rotation on the right shoulder and kind of an overhead position on the left. So when we have him in the position we just did with the left arm overhead, it might be that the right shoulder is the bigger culprit. So let's break that out like we did before. So just reach the right arm behind the back, and then reach the right arm overhead. All right, and then let me see the other side. All right, so that seems a little bit freer actually on the left side compared to going overhead on the right. And let me see behind the back. And that seems, does that feel a little bit freer on that? So both sides are a little bit more restricted when we actually break the pattern out individually on the right, but just working on having the left hand kind of fixed overhead can actually enhance the internal rotation on the right side, just because it gives more feedback for movement on the right. And it allows movement from the rib cage, which will have an effect on the shoulder blade relationship as he moves through there. All right, so we don't have to, even if he feels the tightest on the right side, we can lock in the left arm and do some movement with the right and actually improve the mobility on that end. Okay, so let's now look at playing around with the different angles. So go ahead and put your left hand in again, okay, overhead. And what we're gonna do is kind of walk your body into different angles of the shoulder. All right, so move down. So this is pure overhead here. Now if we want to start exploring more of a scaption or overhead and an angle out to the side, we'll just have Mike move his body, sort of like a clock, and find that scaption, place it right about there, and then we can do the same thing. So the movements are up to interpretation and kind of exploration, but for the most part we want to move the pelvis into a posterior tilt, we want to move the pelvis into an anterior tilt and just get some feedback on what that feels for the stretch. We want to add the other arm into a protraction motion, maybe a protraction with a little bit of a reach across, and then also horizontal abduction and internal rotation, always coupling it with the pelvic motion. Okay, and then we can add straightening one leg, doing the same thing, straightening the other leg, doing the same thing, and just really seeing where differences happen. So we can get to know our bodies better, but at the same time we're improving mobility. All right, so keep walking towards me. And then we can get out to a T position here, or horizontal abduction, do the same thing. All right, and then one of the things that is really helpful, the closer we get to the body, so keep walking yourself down until the hand is almost at the side, all right? And then you can actually roll to your side and, like, let's adjust the kettlebell so the elbow is bent. So Mike's gonna be in a position where he's holding the belt and there is an L being made with the arm. We can work on pure external rotation from here. So we start on the side, and slowly Mike's gonna start to open his body without the elbow coming away. can see where the onset, and that's a key word, the onset of stretch or tension comes. And then once he hits the onset, no more, because there's some things, if you have an unstable capsule, you might overstretch it. But what you're doing here is you're stabilizing the arm at the onset, and then you're gonna, instead of trying to stretch and force more stretch, we're gonna move from the torso and try to create a little bit more stretch, or actually stabilize that position and get more mobility as you're stabilizing. So you feel the stretch there?
Yep.
All right, so then again, breathe out. Does that increase it a little bit? Okay. And then roll back. Now try to get that elbow pinned in a little bit more. Make sure that elbow doesn't come out. All right. And even if you don't go quite as far, just make sure that elbow stays pinned in and roll and open. Okay. And then it becomes same idea. Breathe. Now you may need to stabilize, so I'm going to plant that heel. All right, and get a sense of what that feels like. All right, so you have good stability there. You don't want to feel like you're hanging out in space, like you're trying to not fall over. So you want to have some stability through there. All right, but that will compress the left side of his body a little bit more to work on that. All right, now try to do it on the other side. Try to see if you can compress this side. Does that take stress off, or what does it feel like? Doesn't change.
No.
All right, so you get that feedback right there. But that's the key. All right, so again, you're working on moving from the pelvis, creating a little bit of abdominal activity, and at the same time, you're going to have an effect on mobility at a distal segment. In this case, we're going over the shoulder. All right, so this is just the beginning of a discussion about what I call closed chain mobility. If you have any questions, you can go to movingprofessional.com. I'll see you next time. Thanks.